Hi, my name's Bill Schaeffer, and today's book review is of the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. The I Ching is one of the oldest books known to mankind. Therefore, it's exceedingly presumptuous that I would do a book review on this book at all. But nevertheless, I persist. This book review is really for people who are absolutely unfamiliar with the I Ching. This book is based on the translation by James Legge and has an introduction by Raymond Van Over. Technically speaking, the I Ching is a book of divination. It's a book that's used to foretell the future, in the same way that the tarot deck is used to foretell the future or other forms of astrology or numerology. The book itself was written around 1100 BC and is attributed to the legendary King Wen. But the underlying principle of the book, the I Ching, is based on a fortune-telling method that had existed for the previous 2,000 years or more. And it's based on a fundamental idea of Chinese philosophy called yin and yang, or the light and dark principle of the universe. Masculine and feminine, active, passive, just an element of their philosophy of life. Now, the I Ching is based on the idea of two lines, a broken line or a solid line. Where the solid line corresponds to the yang or the masculine principle, the broken line corresponds to the yin or feminine principle. And the fundamental basis of the I Ching is you use a method to get a hexgram, which is a collection of 6 lines that are either broken or solid. And I won't go into the particulars of that here. But there end up being 64 hexgrams, and you can use throwing coins, selecting a card, or the traditional method of yarrow stalks, and you get 50 yarrow stalks and you cast them and pick them up in a very regular manner to get your entire hexgram. Then based on how you achieve this hexgram, that is your fortune, or that is your result to your question. Now, a little bit about the history of the I Ching. It's a non-typical book in the sense that we're used to thinking of books. It's more like an information resource, and there's different ways to organize the parts of the book. The original book was written around 1100 BC, and its origins are lost in history, but it's attributed to King Wen. It consists of 64 hexgrams and a description of these hexgrams. Now, Confucius is purported to have written commentaries on all 64 hexgrams. So an additional part of the book is a section of commentaries that are attributed to Confucius. And this was during the life of Confucius and afterwards. At the end of his life, Confucius is reported to have said, "If I had 50 more years to live, I would devote them to the study of the I Ching." Now, one thing that makes this book unique is around 200 BC, China was unified by Emperor Qin, which gave his name to the nation China today. And he dramatically reorganized society. Before that time, China was a collection of feudal kingdoms, and he tore down all the walls, joined all the kingdoms by force of arms, and he instituted a revolution in society. He banned all intellectuals. He built the Great Wall of China, and that was his engineering feat. And he used all the intellectuals, intelligentsia of society to work as laborers on the Great Wall, and then he buried them in the Great Wall. There was a massive book burning, and he destroyed and burnt all the books throughout all of China except for 5 books. One of those 5 books was the I Ching. And the other 4 books were practical books of knowledge on agriculture and other technical subjects. So at that time, all the prehistory of China was lost, except for the writings of Confucius, the I Ching, and 3 other books. Now, it's difficult in an English translation to get the full flavor and character of the writing and of the book, because it's difficult to translate Chinese into English. There's many different ways to translate the same ideograms. Nevertheless, a few things make the I Ching unique as compared to the tarot and other systems. The I Ching, as much as it's a form of divination and telling the future, everything is expressed in a form of how to improve your character and what a man or a person of best character or impeccable character would do. Now, the I Ching was unknown in the West until the late 1800s. And James Legge was one of the first translators, and he worked about 20 years translating the I Ching into English. And when he was done, he was largely unimpressed with the work and did not feel it was really worth his time. He thought it was a work of superstition and not very important, except historically as a piece of literature and culturally. But personally, he was not a big fan. His translation is still one of the authoritative translations and is considered to have a lot of fidelity to the original. Carl Jung discovered the I Ching, the famous Jungian psychologist, and he thought it demonstrated a lot of his idea of synchronicity and how events seem to occur together in one's life. As the I Ching became more well known, it became popular with the avant-garde artists and bohemian jazz artists. John Cage used the I Ching to help him randomly compose music. Now, the way the I Ching works, or the way you're supposed to use it, is with a degree of centeredness, reverence, and spiritual mindedness, and away from any distractions. You have an idea in your mind of what you want to ask it, or what you want an opinion on. And then you use different methods to get a hexgram. And I'll spare you the methodology. You can look that up online or find the methodology somewhere else. Throwing coins where most simply heads and tails. A head is a solid yang line. A tail is a broken line. And the simplest way is just throw a single coin 6 times and build your hexgram up from the bottom. So you have 6 throws, 6 lines. Then you go and you look your hexgram up in the chart. And there's a composite chart that has all the hexgrams and where you can find them. And that is the chart. Now, the hexgram is made of 2 trigrams. It's one above the other. And this is part of where the philosophy of what the different symbols mean. And there's 8 of these trigrams that are the father, the mother, the 3 sons, and the 3 daughters. And they each have their own characteristics. And then when they're combined into a hexgram, there's 64 hexgrams. And these all have their own characteristics. And they're traditionally arranged in a sequence where you change one line and get the next one. And it emphasizes this idea that life is continual change. Nothing is stable and steady. And the cycle of the change of the Book of Changes, in fact, the name, the Book of Changes, means that life is continually changing. And when you're on the bottom, things will get better and start to look up. And when you're at the top and everything is at its best is when it will start to decay and things will start to fall apart. And that is an inexorable procession of nature, and it cannot be avoided. And so the way the I Ching is used is to help us develop an appreciation of the constant cycle of change, and to help us recognize where in the cycle of change we are, and based on where we are in this cycle of change, what the best method of acting would be. And the I Ching constantly refers to what the best method of acting is. And in some sense, it's less a book about what is going to happen in the future, and more a book about self-reflection and how to govern one's own behavior. And in that sense, they're constantly talking about the superior man, the ideal man. It'll be beneficial to be firm and correct. It is advantageous to cross the great stream, or otherwise, it is not advantageous to act. There is no benefit in acting anyway. It is not advantageous to cross the great stream. But they constantly refer to this concept of the superior man and how the superior man would act. And the superior man is an idealized version of the person who makes the right decision or the best possible decision in all circumstances. And in that sense, the Book of Changes is an interesting reflection on the nature of life itself. And not in a strict scientific way, but more in a general philosophical way, what the qualities of a person's life are. And because it's expressed enigmatically, and because the method of using it is random, you have some random procedure to arrive at a result to think about. It's different than any other book you've really read or really used. It's totally unique. Now, there is a tradition in the Yoruba tribe, and in the Ifa tradition, there's a way of divining the future that's very similar to the I Ching, building patterns of solid and broken lines, but they use 8 lines instead of 6, and it's more complicated. Now, the I Ching is also interesting because nowhere do they really tell you why or how this hexgram is important. It's not like there's some mystic forces that are arranging things, or there is no theology surrounding it. However, there is an implied sense, and this is the Jungian synchronicity. This is the concept of synchronicity that Carl Jung refers to. There's an implied sense that everything in the universe is connected. If everything is connected, it's not ridiculous that the outcome of this manipulation with coins or yarrow stalks would be reflective of the thing that you are considering. I don't know. That's kind of a mystical leap that I'm not logically willing to take. However, I do use the I Ching to ask about very problem questions. And one way to think of it is the I Ching will give you a random reference that kind of knocks you out of your way of looking at it. And even if it is totally random, like there's no mystical or spiritual connection, it still gives you a different way of considering what it is that's troubling you. And from a philosophical perspective of the superior man or an ideal way to behave. Therefore, if you are interested in Chinese culture, the origins of Chinese philosophy, or just a fun little parlor game to amuse yourself and your friends, I highly suggest the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. Thank you, and leave your comments below.